Hello and welcome to Ask Lovecraft After Dark. I am Lehman Kessler, your host, a host of Ask Lovecraft, the show, and this its sister program. And tonight, we are joined by a very good friend of mine, Stephen Neer. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Yeah, it's great. It's great.
Stephen and I have known each other for 10 years. We met because we were both working for a bookstore, a big chain bookstore in Toronto. We worked on different floors, and we would often get yelled at by managers because we would be having very intensive conversations, not on this floor we were supposed to be working on.
Exactly, yes.
And which is, where all the finest friendships are forged. But Stephen eventually let me know that he was a playwright and was going to be doing a play for the Toronto Fringe, and invited me, or I can't remember. I can't remember if we did an audition for that, or if you invited me to audition, or invited me to be in it. But either way, I wound up doing the play Out of Character, for the 2009 Fringe, I believe.
Right. Yeah. It was actually. I had. I think you had. I'm not sure whether you had whether you had done a reading for. So I had another. I'd written another LARP play that a mutual friend of ours, Erica, had directed, and I had a reading of Shadow Court. I can't recall whether you were in that.
No, I wasn't in Shadow Court. I eventually did do, I think, a staged reading as like a promo for Out of Character.
Yes.
But you had done it because I think another friend of mine, another gaming friend of mine, Todd, was in Shadow Court in the weird, like, incestuous world of Toronto theater and gaming. My friend Todd, who also worked at I knew through book retail at a different store, but I think he had done Shadow Court or had some relationship to Shadow Court.
Todd, yes, of course, he had done Shadow Court. That's right. Okay, of course, yes. Yeah. So yeah, no, that's right. Though we brought you on board for Out of Character, and so that happened in the fringe of that summer, and and then from there it just kind of took off. But yeah, we had known each other. Like, when did you started at the bookstore? Was that
I started in 2008 because I was originally I was up north, Yonge and Eglinton, and then when we moved to downtown, I transferred to the John and Richmond Festival Hall store, which is now a Michael's, the corpse store. I refer to it as whenever I see it.
It's quite stunning, actually. It's really very weird, very, very weird.
But the LARP play, definitely, there's a lot to discuss there. But what folks might be more interested in is the next year you again approached me at the during the work hours when we should have been working to tell me that you wanted to write a play about Lovecraft and about Lovecraft's marriage.
Yeah, well, actually, what had happened was I've always been fascinated by H.P. Lovecraft, and I think we kind of got to talking about it because I was working on the third floor and I was shelving fiction books, and a lot of the books that I was shelving were these collections of H.P. Lovecraft. And I remember you had come up to me and go, "I have two words for you, Stephen: Sonia Green." So I went back and did some research and found out who Sonia Green was. And that was when then the next day I came in and I went, okay, that's it. I'm writing a play about about H.P. Lovecraft, about his marriage to Sonia Green, and you're going to be in it whenever it gets done. Yeah, that was how it started.
Oh, good. I didn't realize I'd been so instrumental at that point.
You were quite inspirational, really. It was pretty cool. It was pretty cool.
Well, and then I think we managed, I was part of a theater company in Toronto called Monkey Man Productions. And we put on sci-fi horror plays and all sorts of general nerdery. And I guess somehow we convinced them to include that in the the Banana Festival.
What happened was that the Banana Festival was, if I recall correctly, Banana Festival was a new play festival that they did every year. And of short new plays, and I sent them a proposal about this play that I wanted to do about Lovecraft. I thought, this is perfect. So I kind of envisioned it as this short play of Lovecraft kind of at the end of his life, recalling this dark chapter, right? Which is not, I thought it was perfect because Howard Lovecraft, his marriage is like never mentioned, never really referred to, or wasn't up until that point. And so yeah, that was how we sold it to Monkey Man, because they were like, oh, this sounds like a cool idea. Yeah, and so I spent the better part of, however, don't know how much time that was. It was probably about a few months, kind of writing a new writing this new play. I remember quite distinctly attending attending a LARP convention in the USA. It was in Atlanta. It was like this beautiful, beautiful hotel that had this garden veranda out back. And I remember sitting out in this veranda like on the Saturday morning or something, and first writing that first monologue about, Lovecraft being in the dark and stuff like that. It's actually it was a pretty cool, I thought it was a really ironic way of starting a play about Lovecraft and, surrounded in lovely nature.
Well, he's a guy who liked his walks through nature, and he appreciated the out of doors.
Yeah.
Well, and that was, yeah, for me that was so fascinating because I was, when people ask me about Ask Lovecraft, and people should realize, if you're fans of Ask Lovecraft, you need to thank two people. You need to thank Stephen Neer and Derek Burrow, because they're the ones who really got this started. They are the parents of this program. They made this beautiful, beautiful baby that you now hold in your arms. This 5-6-year-old baby now. Oof.
Crazy. Yeah.
But people ask, oh, were you a big Lovecraft fan? Had you been, reading him? And because most people, the sort of the standard story is, folks discover Lovecraft as teenagers, and it kind of sticks with them. There's something very adolescent, I think, about how Lovecraft kind of gets his claws into people, makes them feel like, the loner who who sees the monsters where they are.
Yeah.
But I knew Lovecraft through gaming. And I was sort of vaguely aware of the name in college, but I didn't start reading him probably until about a year or so before I did this play.
Honestly, that's that's rather similar to my own experience. I played Call of Cthulhu by Chaosium, I guess, Chaosium Gaming.
Sandy Peterson.
Beyond the Mountains of Madness is actually was so seminal to my upbringing that for a long time I thought Beyond the Mountains of Madness was actually one of his works. It isn't. But I mean, I didn't read a lot of horror when I was growing up. I actually read a lot of science fiction. I think I read a couple of his short stories, like the Coming of the Yellow Sign or something like that. Like some of these weird dreamscape plays that he writes that are like basically science fiction. But I hadn't read At the Mountains of Madness or The Call of Cthulhu until I was much, much older. And admittedly, even then, it's sometimes tough for me to get through Lovecraft because like his characters aren't that engaging. It's all about the plotting, and it's all about like the description of the plotting. And so I find as a storyteller, he's very dependent upon creating tone through structure and through this plot, which is interesting. But I think it goes against the grain of a lot of contemporary literature that you would read these days.
There's one really notable exception to that, and I troll people by saying it's my favorite story of his, but it comes pretty close because it's so different. No, because I mean, Reanimator gets that. I mean, it's long, so you spend more time with Herbert West and the narrator and things like that. No, if you ever read his pastoral romance parody, Sweet Ermengarde.
Oh my gosh! Oh, now I have to.
It is remarkable because. Like you realize, he can write characters, and I mean they're broad and they're ridiculous, but they're actual characters. Like there's a real like life to them. It's a ridiculous life. I mean, it's it's very poking fun at these kind of just ridiculous love stories that I'm sure he was felt inundated with in the teens and 20s. But like the writing, the dialogue is really snappy, which is not something you really think about with Lovecraft.
No, not at all. Not at all. That's crazy. Wow.
And, you sort of wonder like what might have been, if he had gone down that road, if he had been almost this, created a kind of Jeeves and Wooster-esque parody, you know, kind of high comedy arch parodic style, you know, what might have been.
Yeah.
Because it's really funny. I mean, it's like it's just genuinely a funny story. And so at odds at the kind of claustrophobic, slightly like, you know, muted depictions of characters we get in the rest of his stories. And I think that kind of like muted, somewhat like staid persona people then project onto Lovecraft himself. I mean, you know, someone who has portrayed Lovecraft now, starting with you and continuing on for 8 years.
At the same time, though, I find like his characters, you know, they have a sense of vision, right? Like their eyes are always wide open, and that's what I find is something rather intriguing and engaging about the works. Is that, I mean, their eyes are wide open, you know, to the point of paranoia, right? And absolute paralytic fear, which, you know, is cool. But I think there is something for me that's rather engaging about that sense of hyper awareness, right, of his characters.
Well, there's more nuance than people give, I think, him or his characters credit, you know. And and you know, one thing I've battled in portraying Lovecraft is trying to highlight his humanity, highlight the fact that he's not this kind of, again, locked in a closet, afraid of shadows in the walls, you know, misanthrope who won't talk to anyone. I mean, this is a guy that was carrying on communication and correspondence with dozens of people,
right,
you know, throughout his life. I mean, you know, he was, you know, dispensing advice and connecting people. Like he was going to, you know, he was traveling hundreds of miles to visit people in, you know, Florida or Quebec, you know, like he was interested in people. And I think people don't think that about Lovecraft. I think they assume that he is this kind of adolescent, shut in, you know, living with his aunts, just kind of afraid of the world, you know, individual.
Well, and I think, I mean, you know, I mean, there's no getting around it, right? There's no getting around, you know, the elephant in the room regarding Lovecraft and his racism, right?
Yep.
I mean, and that I think is something that, you know, especially in today's day and age, and with literature and writers these days. I mean, you know, this is something that we're having to look at really all of, you know, a lot of art, right? And for me, it also raises the, you know, the pertinent issue, right? You know, is how much can you separate an artist from their work, right? How much does an artist's belief inform their work? And for me, that was really what was at the core of writing Monstrous Invisible, which started out as a 10-minute, very short play, got expanded to, I guess, around a 25-minute, 25-minute play, which was the one that, I mean, you starred in both incarnations.
For folks interested in the timeline, in 2009 we did this short, like not even a one act, just sort of 10-minute mood piece
for the Banana Festival, right? And it was very, like, if people are trying to envision what this was like, it was essentially, I mean, we were performing in the back of this small pub in downtown Toronto. Like literally, it was one of the smallest stages, right?
It was like a rockabilly stage,
It was, but it was great. Like it was just you on stage, dressed as Lovecraft, and this woman would come in sort of intermittently as Sonia, right? And these kind of snippets of a dream, right, of a memory that he was recalling. And then I moved to Hamilton from Toronto because I was originally in Toronto, so I moved to Hamilton, and a couple of years later. Maybe about a year or so, I was invited to present the piece again at another theater festival put on here by a company
that was the Pearl Festival,
by a theater company called the Pearl Company. So I had the luxury of being able to present a bit of a longer piece, and so we got another, I don't know, we had the same director, Laura, I think Lauren, was it?
Laura Rold directed it both times, but we swapped out Sonia's. We had Tanya Lynn the first time.
Right, yes, Tanya.
And Andrea White the second.
That's right, yeah. So the second you were in both, but the second show there was a bit more freedom to kind of expand upon, you know, the scenes and really kind of look at the life of Lovecraft in that lens. And so, one of the things that I found myself wrestling with a lot was trying to unpack, the beliefs, the beliefs held by this man, and where do they come from, right? Like not, and then sort of how do they relate back to so much else of his work, right?
Well, and that was, I mean, you were working from what we know about Lovecraft and his relationship with Sonia, which is kind of, it's hard to find real information because Sonia burned a lot of their letters. And Lovecraft, as I know from reading his letters, doesn't talk about her. Like,
No.
in one of his collections that I've read, where he was communicating with August Derleth, and one of the footnotes, they mentioned, Lovecraft talks about going to travel and doesn't really say why. And then the footnotes are like, he is visiting Sonia Green. He will not mention Sonia ever in his letters to August. And that's just so, he's having this correspondence with this young man and not telling him, oh, my wife and I are going on this trip together, or I'm going to go visit my wife. Like, his relationship with a lot of his younger correspondence it gets parsed for just sort of what was going down there and kind of what his reasonings were. But, regardless, that's just strange. So I guess how much actual material did you have to work from, and how much were you really just inventing sort of whole cloth?
Well, I mean, I tried to get sort of the tenor of his voice. I mean, I read a lot of his work, but really the place where the research kind of came in was I just kind of followed, tried to see, okay, so this is where they sort of met, right? This is the area where they met, and then this is the place where this is what seemed to cause the big triggers for them parting ways. It should be noted that I mean, although they separated, they never actually divorced.
Nope.
Because he never actually formalized that, and how that came about is a bit of a mystery. It seems that Sonia sent him the papers and he never signed them. And I think that, from what I recall, my correspondence, I mean, she remarried. So that caused her a tremendous amount of anxiety when she found out later in life. So, I mean, what I tried to do in my research, and then kind of transporting that onto, or kind of translating that, adapting it for the stage, I tried to find, markers in their life of what I thought, okay, what's significant here, and this also goes when I expanded the piece from a sort of 25-minute play to about an hour and maybe 30-minute piece that was then produced by Theatre Aquarius, which had the two characters, but also had a third character that is now in the most recent iteration, which is essentially, I kind of saw Lovecraft as being haunted really by a shadow of some type, a shadow that kind of represented so many of his fears and anxieties, right? And so that's what's in the latest iteration, and kind of in this script kind of acts as a trigger to kind of pulling Lovecraft back in time, essentially. Because I always thought of the idea that, if you were an author like Lovecraft whose life seemed steeped in very dark things, and he did not strike me as an individual who had a tremendous amount of joy in his life. And when you get married, I mean, that's when you find love. And from all intents and purposes, from my research, I mean, he seemed very much to love her, and this union with Sonia Green seemed to be something that really did give him joy and pleasure. So I thought, well, then what? Like, if you find yourself at the end of your life and there's this one little spark of good, but you don't talk about it, right? You don't share this information with people. You won't even sign papers regarding a divorce about it. Like, so that for me kind of suggested that it was a bit of a secret, and it was something that needed to be unearthed, right? So then what I did is I kind of looked at these sort of significant events in Howard's life, in her life, that I could garner from some of my research, and said, okay, these make interesting points. And then sort of in the midst of that, what are some things that I could extrapolate? So, for example, I talked about their honeymoon, right? And their honeymoon, I forget where they went. Like I want to say,
They went to the coast, but it was all marred because working on
he was working,
Houdini's.
yeah, he was working on Houdini's manuscript. So that's something that I actually visit is the two of them actually working on Houdini's manuscript, right? Um, but like, I mean, one of the things that I do touch upon in at least a latter stage of the play is this issue of children, right? Like, they didn't have children. How did they feel about children? Did they try to have a child and something happened there? I don't know. So it's things like that come out in the adaptation. So I want to say that the locations and sort of the scenarios were signposts, but in the midst of that, I mean, in the grand tradition of fiction, right? You fictionalize based upon, kernels of truth, if you will.
And I remember, because I never saw your third version, but I think at one point you sent me a script because we were trying to figure out a way to do either a reading of it at Necronomicon.
That's right. Yes. Or
and
Monkey Man had given thoughts about producing it as well.
Yes, that's right. Before I left Toronto. And I remember it was much more visceral. Like, their relationship was much more physical on stage.
Yep. Yeah.
I think you would it was just, there was a lot more intense stuff happening throughout it. The first one, there's like one kiss in the whole thing, and it's like this this moment of dynamite, because it's so like, again, we think of Lovecraft in these very like antiseptic ways. But it did provide one of the
first, and even in the first one, like the kiss goes to happen and then it doesn't happen, right? So, but I mean, I thought, like it you're right. When I went to write the other piece, I thought, like, horror is pretty visceral, right? And some of his stuff, I mean, it's body horror, right? Like it's some stuff there. And I thought, but it just seemed inconceivable to me. All these books talk about, oh, well, Lovecraft was a germaphobe and Lovecraft, didn't like being physical. I'm like, I don't know. I'm not sure how much of this I'm buying, right? Like, I mean, that's what we're learning sort of from biographers who said this or learned this from a letter. But, I mean, the way someone is on the page, as I've learned, the way someone is on the page, whether from someone describing them or from their own sort of self, is very different, right? So I thought that was an interesting way of taking this character who is very cerebral, and I think whose fans and critics view him from a very cerebral perspective, and really grounding him as a human being, right? As a flesh and blood human being. Because all that horror, all the commentary about horror is coming from someplace. And I think it's coming from someplace physical.
Well, I mean, and also certainly the version I did, and I think I got a bit of this with the sort of the shadow entity. There's almost something purgatorial about these plays. He's Absolutely. Kind of unstuck in time. In the version I did, it starts with this kind of pleading into darkness. You're out there, aren't you? Yep. And he keeps sort of swirling back and talking to this, and again, this kind of middle version, first two versions, this unseen antagonist. And you don't know if he's talking to Sonia, is he talking to himself? Is he talking to Azathoth out in, the great gibbering wastes at the center of the universe? But it was really, I don't know, it was very fascinating. And then to see that, how Laura staged that was really fun. Because the first time we did it, this 10-minute version, she had such a complex stage in this really small area. She just had like piled up all these old books, and a bunch of them she had like glued together and hollowed out so we could like open them up and pull props out of the books.
That's right, of course.
It was just this really intense staging. And then when we did it in Hamilton, it was much more simple staging. She just had like 80 copies of Call of Cthulhu and just spread the pages all over the stage. And we just sort of were walking through this kind of like snowfield of pages, and would occasionally pick them up and refer, that was the Divorce Papers was one of those, and like a story he was working on was another, letters they were exchanging. Like it was fascinating to see how Laura took, again, a very cerebral sort of a spiritual play about a cerebral guy and rooted it in this really clever physical way. I'm going to hopefully have her on at some point to pick her brain if she even remembers. But the fact that you could take this, the same play in two spaces in two very wildly different directions was really was powerful to see, to be a part of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, that was something that even found its way, to sort of migrated into the stage play that we did at Aquarius, right? The paper became this sort of living entity, right? Like the centerpiece of the set was this large swath of paper that kind of stretched its way up to the ceiling. And we also had a magician, Nick Wallace, who is most recently, I think he was on Penn and Teller just recently. He actually fooled Penn and Teller. He's a very very gifted stage magician and theater performer as well. But he actually built in a number of sleight of hand tricks in this production. So at one point in time, he kind of, like, the papers kind of start manifesting in his hands, and also, like, we found a way for him to be wearing like a nightgown that then all of a sudden like transforms into his suit. Right? It was a really cool production. If I do say so myself, it was my first professional production, and it opened up this series at Theater Aquarius that called the TA2 series, which stages local pieces by local artists. So it was a real honor for this new version of Monstrous Invisible to be that sort of opening, because it was so theatrical, and it made use of the theatrical language, which I think is something that Lovecraft would have gone, oh yes, I understand that.
Well, I make fun of, when I do the show, I sort of have one of the running gags is that Lovecraft hate actors, and the idea of anyone impersonating him is absolutely anathema to me. So that's my playing with the genre a bit. Now, to move away from Lovecraft, your current show is a continuation of these LARP plays. Is correct? It's in that same vein, same. I don't know if it's a canon at this point, or if you just sort of keep reinventing it as it goes along.
Sorry, you kind of dropped.
Oh, I'm sorry. The current show that's coming up, Test,
yes,
is another play that's based on LARP. Is it a continuation of the previous sort of stories that we've told, or are you kind of going off in a new direction this time?
It actually is, yes. So Test, to kind of give some background, Test was a play that you starred in along with our friend
Adriana.
And it was, once again, it was like, I think it was like the year after Monstrous Invisible was done. I don't know. It wasn't. No,
it was the same year. Because I just looked up. It was a different year. Well, it was the same year as the Pearl Festival. So we did.
No, I mean the Banana Festival. So
okay, yes, yeah.
It was like a year or two after the Banana Festival, right? But it was done in that same little back tavern. But this time it was basically two LARPers who had a relationship in the past, and I kind of built it upon like the two characters that were in Out of Character. So that was kind of a continuation from that play. And so, it was a 10-minute play about these two LARPers who kind of were reconnecting after going through this experience, and essentially it was, what happens, outside the hotel when you're both bombing a smoke and you're trying to make small talk. But then when I was I'm in Hamilton, so I'm a part of the Theater Aquarius playwrights unit, and I brought in a script that I've been developing with the help of Daniel McIver at the Banff Center for the Arts in Alberta. So I've been working on this play, and it essentially was a longer version of these two characters. But then I kind of opened it up a bit and made it a play about these two LARPers who see each other, and kind of as they see each other, they sort of jump in and out of the world of the game, as a way of reliving their past together. So it's very meta theatrical in that way. You know, both characters are aware that they're telling their story to an audience. You know, time and space really are very quickly shifting around. And so I did this. So this play was completed, and I actually performed it as part of the 2013 Hamilton Fringe Festival. I was in it, and my friend Sarah Weber was also in it. And it was, you know, it did really well, and people seemed to enjoy it. I was thought, God, is anyone going to buy this? Like, is this going to be a play about LARPers? Are people going to get this? But really, I mean, at its core, it's just a story of two people who you know, find themselves falling in love with each other in the midst of this very strange hobby, and sort of the ramifications of that, right? And since that time, I've you know, written a number of other plays, but my co-founder, the co-founder of Same Boat Theater, my theater company in Hamilton, has kept on coming back to this play because he directed that initial. He directed the version that was on in the Hamilton Fringe, and he's kept on coming back to it, going, "I want to do this again. I want to do this again." It's in a lot of ways, it's a timeless play. It's a fun play. Our theater company has done a lot of very political pieces. Like a couple of years ago, we did a piece about the Harper government in Canada, and then just earlier this year, we did a play about tackling a homegrown radicalization. So we decided we'd do something a bit light, which was basically a return to test, and you know, in a lot of ways, it's a romantic comedy. But I mean, it also has things to say about how we fictionalize our lives, how memories are fictionalized, how when we retell stories to each other, how accurate are we being, how misleading are we being, and also, yeah, it's a love letter to the hobby of LARP, which has been a part of my creativity since the mid '90s. You know, LARP is live action role play, and it's essentially a mixture between improvisational theater and Dungeons and Dragons. I first got into it when I was playing a game by White Wolf called Vampire the Masquerade. You know, and I'm sure that almost everyone who is tuning into you right now is going, "Oh yeah, I remember that." You know, Vampire the Masquerade just came out this year on its 5th edition. Like it's been going along that long.
Yeah, we just had on Ken Hite, who who wrote the 5th edition. Yeah, so yeah, Vampire is one I played back in you know, my high school days as well. You know, so it's
everybody has touched on Vampire. I'm convinced of it, right? In some way, shape, or form. And I mean, even tropes of, you know, modern vampire culture that we understand today, and yes, I'm including Twilight in this, have been influenced in some way by Vampire the Masquerade, right? Like this notion of, you know, vampire covens, you know, being these powerful figures that, you know, oppress the young. I mean, that's like totally Vampire the Masquerade. So this play Test is a play on, it's a love letter to LARP, but it's also a love letter to you know, role-playing games like that. The notion of test is, I mean, for anyone who is not aware, when you play a live-action role-playing game, you don't have dice, right? So how you resolve conflicts is you play rock, paper, scissors, right? You know, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, right? So, and that's called a test. And that's basically the whole narrative, a conceit of the play is that these two characters are testing one another again, for, you know, who's telling the truth in their story, who gets to tell a certain part of their story, but ultimately it's a test of their relationship, right? It's a play that's really quite close to my heart, and it's a real pleasure to be able to see it staged, and especially in this case, I'm not in it, so I get to sit and watch two actors. I was just in the rehearsal today, and I'm really pleased. I'm really excited.
Well, I remember when I did the smaller version, the earlier version of Test. For me, it was really fascinating because it was the first time I'd ever gotten a chance to do a sequel. because
That's true. Yeah.
Out of Character was one of the really like one of the first plays I did in Toronto. I had I'd done a small piece King Kong play with Monkey Man. I was in a really I was in a very strange play where I was a golem. Uh, um,
Gosh, wow.
and then you invited me to do Out of Character, and Out of Character was so huge and so ambitious. We had this great cast. And there was Phil Rickaby, there was Kevin, there was Adriana, Scott Sykes from work was in there. And there was
Jessica Moss as well.
Jessica Moss,
like it was
Kat was there. Kat Leonard, I think, was in that.
Kat Leonard, yeah, and Nick. And Nick is and I'm forgetting Nick's last name, I think, but
and we were all playing two characters, right? Like that was, I got to be both this. I got to be both this kind of, slightly nebbishy, gamer guy, and also I got to be Dr. Gottlieb, the master of the unknown.
Well, and the play wasn't even done in a theater. We did it in I think what used to be like the U of T student club. It's gone now, but it was this place called the Cat's Eye Lounge.
That's right. It was just like a dining, like a sort of restaurant.
It was a big space, and that was a conscious decision on Erica's part.
Yeah, because we all had to sort of like move back and forth, and we did certain stuff up in some areas, and like would have to like march across this entire restaurant. Because it was kind of theater on the round, or no, the audience was the audience was on the sides, and we kind of kept running back and forth. No, it was very ambitious. It was the first time I'd worked with Erica, and who I think also was involved with LARP.
Very much so, and that's. I mean, I don't know if you keep up at all with Erica right now.
Oh yes,
Erica's. I repost Erica's commentary on LARP like regularly. Like she's really gone on to successfully merge and find ways of. I mean, she's really an advocate for this Nordic style of LARP, which is really, theatrical LARP. Non-mechanical rules, things of that nature. So she's that's her trajectory right now.
And so to go from doing this big, this very big, very complex staging, complex character, who am I at this? Like in this scene, am I Nick, or in this scene, am I Gottlieb? Big costumes, to big at the back of the Imperial Pub again. Just sort of being with Adriana, this very small, very intimate. And Adriana was also we were playing the same characters. It was Dana. Was it Dana and Nick? I think it was Nick.
Dana and Dana and Nick in that. Yeah.
And getting a chance to revisit those characters, years later, but only for, in actuality, it was only like a year or two later for us. But like it was very powerful. Like just as an acting exercise, like how do you return to a character? And so that was a great experience. And I'm really excited to see that it's continued, that life has continued. You mentioned how Erica has found the way to sort of blend LARP and theater, but how have the two informed themselves for you? Like, do you try to keep them in separate spheres, except when you sort of write these plays, or do you find there's a lot of bleed over?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, a lot of people have asked the question, has this play changed in the last few years, right? And I'm not sure the play has changed, but I think the culture of LARPing and role play has changed, obviously. And you mentioned the term bleed, and like that's a really key term that's discussed these days in LARP circles. The phenomenon of bleed, right? The notion that we do have to observe sort of the distinction between our lives in a LARP and our lives in reality, but also allowing bleed, understanding that a certain amount of bleed from the game into real life and from real life into game is healthy, is necessary, is unavoidable. I mean, one of the things that we examined, I've noticed in my writing of all of my LARP plays, and there's one more that I'm doing in the midst of now, is an observance that when people play a LARP character, they invariably tend towards the same archetypes. I very, very rarely see players deviate from playing at least similar archetypes to ones that are rooted in qualities that are themselves, right? Or the same type of archetype. People play the same type of archetypes, I think, because they enjoy playing those aspects of themselves, right? And when they don't play characters that are rooted in those archetypes, then the characters kind of feel flat. And it's something I've only noticed recently. And so I guess from a theatrical perspective, as a playwright, I mean, I've just noticed that for me, it's very interesting understanding that, there are so many people who play LARPs that view them as games, when in fact they're quite far from games. They're explorations of fictional lives. And I always question, like, what would happen if more gamers kind of took that aspect of their LARPing experience and really unpacked it, right? To go, okay, so why am I playing this, right? And what am I getting out of that? And what else do I want to explore in my LARP experience? Like there's a friend of mine who, very often will play sort of the same types of characters in a LARP, and sometimes they're a bit goofy, sometimes they sort of tend towards chasing plot, right? Chasing story, resolving plot. And I think I've seen this player on one or two occasions really dive deep into a character, like as the character, and go, I'm exploring this character I'm exploring this LARP, this particular LARP character for understanding the psychology of this. And I think for me, what's most fascinating about that is going, okay, it is sort of saying, well, why are you portraying that particular character, or why do you keep on returning to these particular archetypes, right? And for me, it's just a recognition of theatricality, the importance of fiction in people's lives, right? Of building fictions around themselves, building narratives around themselves, and really kind of embodying those narratives in characters that can kind of walk around and talk and dress like this or that, right? One of the things that's really prominent in these LARP plays that I write are people kind of jumping in and out of character, right? So most of the plays, characters aren't really able to talk to one another honestly as themselves, but when they adopt a persona, then they're actually able to express what they're really feeling.
And when you do role play with folks who do have either come from an acting background or a theater background, do you find that there's any difference? Do they tend to be a bit more arch? Do they tend to be a bit more distanced, as actors sometimes get, or is it pretty much just the same as anyone?
No, those people that I LARP with, and there's actually been very few. I have not played with a lot of, at least that I know of. I'm pretty much able to spot the people who I play with who have some sort of theatrical training. A couple of people in Toronto that I used to play with, and I'm like, oh yeah, I know, okay, this is going to be an interesting scene. But at the same time, though, like, a lot of times, like, some of the best scenes have come out of people who don't have a big theater training background, but just throw themselves whole hog into this persona, right? Like a friend of mine, Jody Lemoyne, he's a computer programmer, but he is one of my oldest friends from Toronto LARPing circles. I don't think he's trained in any way, shape, or form with theater. But man, oh man, you play off of him, and it's going to be like hours of intense in-character gaming. And he's just one example. There's a number of people I could name. I mean, my wife as well is a very avid gamer, and so there's a lot of and that's what I find so fascinating about it, is that it's people bring so many aspects of themselves into the game that all this notion of having theatrical training kind of doesn't matter, because you just throw yourself into this character and you have fun with the character, and as long as you remain rooted in the world of the game, right? Like, you don't, as is said, you don't drop out of character. You kind of allow yourself the confines of being immersed in the world, then, you know, I think you kind of can surpass this notion of it being a game, and it becomes a real experience, dramatic experience.
What games are you currently playing right now?
Well, we are actually playing in Hamilton. My wife is actually running a vampire game,
Using
Vampire
the new
Masquerade.
fifth ed or
No,
Requiem?
actually a game. The company By Night Studios, which was sort of a breakaway from, or so it's basically they have some of the licenses from White
Oh
Wolf, like
yeah, because I know it
White
kind
Wolf
of
licenses it
up.
out,
Yeah.
right? So you have White Wolf, you have Onyx Group that's publishing materials, but then By Night Studios is like, no, we just wanted the licenses to purely do LARP. So we run sort of Camarilla Anarch, which is like, I don't want to say they're good guy vampires, but they're like, you know, the more conspiratorial Illuminati type vampires. So I'm playing that game. I'm playing a Sabbat game, and the Sabbat are basically the, you know, the devil worshipping, chaotic, evil vampires. So we have one of those games playing as well. Yeah.
Very nice. Excellent. We have a question.
I don't play as much. Yeah.
No, well, I don't. Yes, I don't play nearly as much as I would like to either. So I think that's
exactly right.
You have children until you can force them to like start rolling dice with you.
Well, and that's it exactly. Yeah, I hear you.
I mean, I guess in theory, I'm LARPing every day. It's just I'm LARPing with Elsa from Frozen. So
hey, I went through that phase, but now it's Moana for me.
See, we were in Moana, and I thought like, oh, we're gonna skip Elsa, but no, Moana has been forgotten. Moana's garbage. Now it's all Elsa all the time. She's like signing checks as Elsa. It's a whole mess.
Let it go. Just let it go.
We have a question from the audience. Someone was very interested in hearing about the Conspiracy of Michael.
Oh gosh, the Conspiracy of Michael. Yeah. Well, the Conspiracy of Michael was a play that was actually the second play that we produced as part of my theater company, Same Boat Theater, and really what it was all about was my exploration of conspiracy theory as a form of grief, right? As a grief coping mechanism. I actually started writing it in response. Around that time was when Malaysian flights, that Malaysian plane disappeared,
right,
in the Philippines, and so you know you had these terrible photos of these families kind of, you know, against a wall with these candles and these murals of the airplane, and I thought, you know, this is just a constant state of grief, but at the same time, you know, all of these theories were coming out right on the internet, right? Like, oh, it was piloted to a remote island in the Indian Ocean, or it was taken down. You know, the pilot took it down, or it was flown to China, or you know, this or that or the other thing. And I just thought, like, these are conspiracy theories are a method for imposing order. You know, I think imposing order on disorder or chaotic things, right? Once again, it's a way of using, in my view, fictionalized narratives to create order in our lives, right? Because human lives are messy, human lives are disordered. You know, we make decisions in our lives that make no sense. Things happen to us, things happen to those we love that seemingly have no order. You know, random terrible things can happen. So I've always viewed conspiracy theory. Obviously, there are some conspiracies that are absolutely real. I'm not saying that there aren't, but I'm more interested in conspiracy theories, right? That run the gambit from, oh, that's plausible, to what the f. And so, but you know, they're there, and I always have been fascinated by people that attach themselves to this type of theorizing about the world around them. And
well,
so that was where that came from.
There's two very strong appeals to it, right? The first, as you said, is the sort of creating order. Okay, it's not just that nothing's in control and there's just chaos and anything can happen to me and the people I love at any moment. You know, there is an order and if it can be figured out. And also there's this kind of gnosis aspect, right? Like not only is there something to figure out, but I, having figured it out, am now part of the, you know, sort of inner sanctum, and thus like have value that is attributed to this special knowledge.
Yep. And I found, especially like growing up, or not growing up, but especially, you know, going through the 90s, like the 90s, you know, I mean, what was the most popular show on TV? It was the X-Files, right? Like, you know, that was when, you know, we were just coming, you know, Oliver Stone's JFK came out, and that kind of galvanized the American public to the conspiracy theory about the assassination of their president. So, you know, I think there's something very tantalizing about conspiracy theories. There's also something very comforting about conspiracy theories. Oh, this happened because this, right? And I mean, I think you see it too in you know, the type of alt-right theories that are going around in the States right now. You know, I mean, you know, why is this happening? Well, obviously it's, you know, George Soros
That's right.
doing this or that. I'm just like, where the hell is this coming from? But I mean, I think it's an attempt in many ways by people to create uh, a plausible or somewhat plausible but easy to digest narrative. It's out of my control. It's in control of someone else. Someone else has the answers. Someone else has the money, the power, the influence, what have you. And I am but a pawn. But because I am a pawn who is seeing the board, I have that one little thing of power. I know this, and I can tell you about it. So that's good, you know.
Someone in the audience mentioned Robert Anton Wilson, and Robert Anton Wilson comes up on this show quite a bit because
Oh, I love Robert Anton Wilson.
I spent a lot of
Oh,
time with
23 Skidoo.
well, I
Yeah.
spent a lot of time with game designers who, you know, you know, love Robert Anton Wilson, and also just that kind of that weird occult world, you know, like how he intersects with theosophy. But it's interesting, right? You know, I thought I was so in love with Robert Anton Wilson as a teenager and in my early 20s, but I kind of wonder if he and the kind of discordant, like everything's a joke cynicism is not in some way responsible, or at least like has contributed to this breakdown we see today, right? Where no one can agree on what reality is because it's all a big joke. Like, you know, your fake news is my, you know, is my reality and vice versa. You know, like, I don't know. There's something about that kind of let's treat all knowledge, all anything that's objective reality is subjective, and you know, let's just make a joke at it. I don't know. I feel like that's kind of come back to bite us, right?
Oh, for sure. And I mean, I think it's interesting, you know, that Wilson's writing kind of first came to the fore in the 60s, right? Counterculture 60s. But I mean, at the same time, I mean, that's when you had, you know, the theories that, you know, you had Timothy Leary, who was in prominence. And of course, you know, my favorite author, Philip K. Dick, who, you know, also in his work really brought home this notion of we're all just simulations, right? Or this reality that you think is acceptable is actually not the real thing at all. There are multiple levels of reality. And one of the things that when I was getting into Robert Anton Wilson, it kind of harkened back. And that's when I really started digging deep into the work of Philip K. Dick and, you know, understanding that his writing, his process for creating narratives was in many ways a way to unearth, unpack, and break open this notion of we live in a shared consensual reality. I see what you mean by, you know, that some of that's coming back to bite us in the ass, but I what I wonder about is what I'm finding, and I don't know where this is coming from, but I'm finding that at least from some corners of society, there are people who are deliberately removing their critical thinking caps, if you will, right? They're kind of accepting, oh, there's illusionary realities around, or there's just fragmented realities, but I'm just going to buy that one. I'm just going to buy that one, which they're calling fake news, but because they're calling it fake news, well, then it has to be real. You know, it has to. That's the one that should be believed. When in fact the whole point of some of these writers, like Wilson, like Philip K. Dick, I think, was to realize that, well, like if you're buying into this particular reality, then maybe that's the one that you should be like breaking open a bit and looking at who's actually being played here. And I don't know where that's coming in. I think that, but for me, that's one of the more disturbing elements. Is I feel like people are buying this whole notion of, you know, oh, the Matrix, right? We all live in a simulated reality because that's cool.
And the
But what
basilisk is going to come for us.
Yeah, but I mean, what I also don't think is like, yeah, I mean, it's much harder then to realize, okay, well, if this is a simulation, if this is a hologram, if this is a manufactured reality, then who's manufacturing it? And it's not just evil robots like who have plugged us into something. No, there's like actual people who, have money and power and investments and, haven't plugged us into some matrix thing, but, are selling you things through the TV and through the internet, and you're buying them willingly. So are you part of the matrix,
Well, this goes back to how I truly discovered Lovecraft, which is by playing Steve Jackson's Illuminati card game, which had the
Oh,
Servants of Cthulhu. Like that was the first time I was ever introduced to the idea of Cthulhu was through that
yeah.
game.
It's great. It's great. I still have that. That game. That game book here.
I'm distressed that like of all the games that I grew up with, like that was the best at predicting the current reality we embody, right? Like you just can, Republicans control the, or Russia controls the Republicans and comic books and uses that to take over, the White House. Like it's all
the network, the cyber network.
The network is there.
Right?
The gnomes of Zurich are running around still. So
yeah, I know.
Oh, that's such a great.
Pretty scary.
Well, Stephen, thank you so much for coming on. Let us know when is Test coming out, and where can folks go see it?
Well, Test opens this week. It runs the 18th, 19th, 20th, and then the 25th, 26th, and 27th in Hamilton, Ontario. That's in Canada, at a place called the Staircase Theatre. If you want to find out more about it or purchase tickets, if you're in the area, all you need to do is go to my website, sameboattheater.com. And yeah, there's plenty of information there, including information for purchasing tickets at Brown Paper Tickets. But yeah, sameboattheater.com, under Test, you'll find all the information there.
Great. And is there anything else folks can look forward to in the future?
Gosh, I don't know. I've been so busy this year that I'm not. I don't know. I've always got stuff in the works, but nothing immediately on the horizon.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
And for those of you, this is your first time, I'm Lehman Kessler of Ask Lovecraft. If you're interested in all things Lovecraft, you can find me portraying him 3 times a week at AskLovecraft.com. You can be part of these live shows, this last Lovecraft After Dark live show, which comes out hopefully every 2 weeks. You can be part of that live conversation by going to Facebook and joining the Ask Lovecraft Appreciation Society. You can follow me on Twitter, Screaming Into the Void at twitter.com/Lehman Kessler. And if you would like to support the program, you can donate at patreon.com/Ask Lovecraft. Thank you so much for watching. Stephen, thank you so much for being on the show. And thank you for asking me to play H.P. Lovecraft like a decade ago.
Well, thank you for keeping the tradition alive. My gosh, it's amazing, and I do hope if there are any people out there, any theater producers, any artistic directors, anyone who's like, oh, maybe might be something interesting to produce. Hey, I got the script, so just contact me, please, and we can talk, because it's a fascinating story, and I'd love to see it be seen by a wider audience for sure.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all once again. Thank you, Stephen, and I hope you all have a wonderful night. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.